It was supposed to be a simple act of human kindness on a Tuesday night, when a 26-year-old nurse found a shivering, dark-haired child abandoned in a brutal nor'easter storm. She didn't hesitate to shelter him. She wrapped her coat around his freezing shoulders, completely unaware that the boy's bloodline was ancient, and his father was the most ruthless predator walking among the northeastern elite. Sometimes saving a life is the fastest way to forfeit your own. The rain in Boston that October night was less like weather and more like an assault. It came down in jagged, icy sheets, flooding the cobblestones of Beacon Hill and overflowing the gutters along Tremont Street. Clara Higgins, a 26-year-old emergency room nurse at Boston General, stepped out of the automatic sliding doors and pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her exhausted frame. She had just survived a brutal 14-hour shift. Her feet ached in her worn-out sneakers. Her scrubs smelled faintly of clinical antiseptic, and her mind was a numb void, craving nothing but a hot shower and her cheap apartment bed. She gripped her umbrella, bracing against the gale-force wind as she began the 4-block trek to her parked car. The streets were deserted. Normal people had the sense to stay indoors during a storm warning. That was when she saw him. Sitting on a wet iron bench inside a poorly lit bus shelter was a child. He couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. Clara stopped in her tracks, blinking through the blinding rain to make sure her sleep-deprived brain wasn't hallucinating. But he was real. He was dressed in a way that defied modern logic. A tailored midnight blue velvet coat that looked incredibly expensive, a pristine white button-down shirt and dark trousers. He had no umbrella. He was completely drenched. His raven black hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping steadily from his pale chin. Clara's professional instincts hijacked her exhaustion. "Hey!" she called out, running toward the shelter, her sneakers splashing heavily into deep puddles. "Hey, sweetheart, where are your parents?" The boy didn't flinch at her sudden approach. He didn't cry. He just slowly lifted his head. Clara felt a strange cold jolt in her chest when his eyes met hers. They were an unnerving shade of pale, icy blue, and they held an ancient, quiet intelligence that did not belong on the face of a kindergartner. His skin was impossibly pale, possessing a porcelain quality that seemed to faintly catch the dim, amber glow of the street lamp overhead. "I am waiting," the boy said. His voice was soft, melodic, and possessed a bizarrely formal cadence. His teeth chattered slightly, the only sign that the freezing temperature was affecting him at all. "Waiting for who? It's 2 in the morning? Honey, you're freezing?" Clara dropped to her knees, heedless of the filthy puddle soaking through her scrubs. She immediately unbuttoned her wool coat and wrapped it around his small shoulders. When her hand brushed his cheek, she gasped. He felt like a block of solid ice. "My father," the boy replied smoothly, pulling her coat around himself with a small, dignified nod of thanks. "There was an incident. Our vehicle was compromised by men carrying silver weapons. My father instructed me to walk until I reached the lights and to wait. He will come for me." Clara frowned, her mind racing. Compromised silver weapons? She assumed the poor child was in shock, perhaps repeating lines from a movie he'd seen, or worse, hallucinating from mild hypothermia. "Okay, well, we can't wait here," Clara said, her tone gentle but firm. "My car is a block away, but there's a 24-hour diner right on the corner. We're going to get you inside, get you warm, and call the police to help find your dad. Come on." She expected resistance, the typical fear a child has of a stranger. Instead, the boy stood up with a strange fluid grace. "The police will not be necessary, Clara," he said. Clara froze her hand, gripping his small shoulder. She stared down at him. "How do you know my name?" The boy pointed a slender, aristocratic finger at the laminated hospital ID badge clipped to her breast pocket. "You are labeled," he said simply. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding, laughing nervously. "Right, observant. What's your name?" "Leo," he answered. "All right, Leo, let's get out of this storm." Clara grabbed his small, freezing hand, sheltering him as best she could with her umbrella, and hurried toward the neon sign of Dave's Diner, glowing furiously through the fog. The diner was a classic greasy spoon establishment, mostly empty save for a truck driver snoring in a corner booth, and the owner, an older man named Bill, wiping down the counter with a dirty rag. The bell above the door jingled as they burst in, accompanied by a howling gust of wind. Bill looked up, his scowl deepening. "Kitchen's closed for everything but pie and coffee, Clara. Who's the kid?" "Found him at the bus stop, Bill. Someone abandoned him in the storm," Clara panted, guiding Leo to a red vinyl booth away from the windows. "Get me a hot chocolate, extra hot, and a couple of dry towels if you have them. I need to call Boston PD." Bill grunted, disappearing into the back. Clara pulled her phone from her pocket, groaning when she saw the screen. No service. The storm must have knocked out the local cell tower. She looked over at the diner's landline phone hanging by the register, intending to use it as soon as she got Leo settled. She turned back to the boy. He was sitting perfectly straight in the booth, the oversized wool coat draped over him. He wasn't shivering anymore. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the diner, Clara noticed more details. On his right thumb, he wore a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a snarling wolf's head, and crossed swords, an antique piece that looked heavy enough to act as brass knuckles. "Are you warming up, Leo?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from him. Leo simply stared at her throat. His gaze was fixed, unblinking, tracing the rhythmic pulse of the carotid artery just beneath her skin. For a fleeting second, Clara felt a visceral, primal urge to cover her neck. The silence stretched thick and heavy until Leo finally dragged his eyes up to meet hers. "You smell like fear and iodine and something very sweet," Leo whispered, tilting his head. "You should not have brought me inside, Clara Higgins. When my father arrives, he will not like that there are witnesses." Before Clara could process the chilling warning, the harsh glare of high-beam headlights flooded the diner. The light was so blindingly bright it washed out the neon glow of the diner's sign. Clara shielded her eyes, squinting through the rain-streaked window. Outside, 3 massive black Cadillac Escalades had swerved onto the sidewalk, completely boxing in the diner's entrance. The vehicles were heavily modified, armored siding, tinted windows that looked thick enough to stop a bullet, and matte black grills that made them look like armored military transports. Bill emerged from the back, holding a mug of hot chocolate and a ragged towel. He stopped dead in his tracks, dropping the towel. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his hand instinctively dropping beneath the counter where Clara knew he kept a loaded shotgun. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. A dozen men stepped out into the torrential rain. They wore sleek, tailored dark suits, but their movements were unnervingly synchronized and predatory. They didn't run from the rain. They moved with an eerie, unhurried calm, fanning out to secure the perimeter of the diner. Then the back door of the center vehicle opened. The man who stepped out seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the diner before he even walked through the door. He was exceptionally tall, well over 6 feet, with a broad, powerful build, draped in a bespoke charcoal overcoat. As he walked toward the diner, Clara noticed a terrifying detail. The torrential rain seemed to avoid him. It was a trick of the light, surely, but not a single drop appeared to strike his immaculate clothing or his dark, swept-back hair. When he pushed the diner door open, the little bell above it didn't just jingle. It shrieked as if the metal itself was protesting his entry. The air pressure inside the room plummeted. Clara felt her ears pop. A wave of cold smelling of crushed pine needles, ozone, and copper washed over the greasy scent of the diner. The truck driver in the corner suddenly stopped snoring, bolting awake with a gasp of pure, unadulterated terror, shrinking back into his booth. Bill's hand came away from his shotgun, his face draining of all color. The man paused, scanning the room. His features were devastatingly striking high, aristocratic cheekbones, a sharp, unyielding jawline, and eyes as dark and endless as an abyss. When his gaze locked onto the red booth, he moved. He didn't walk so much as he glided, clearing the distance in 3 long, silent strides. "Leo," the man said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that vibrated in Clara's ribs. It was a voice used to absolute obedience. "Father," Leo replied, slipping out of the booth. He left Clara's wool coat behind, standing straight and walking over to the towering man. The man placed a massive, pale hand on the boy's shoulder, inspecting him with a swift, clinical gaze. "Are you injured?" "No, father. The wolves did not follow me past the city limits. This woman provided shelter." Leo gestured vaguely toward Clara. The man finally looked at Clara. Up close, the sheer predatory aura of him made Clara's breath hitch. His eyes weren't just dark. There were faint, mesmerizing rings of crimson around the irises that caught the fluorescent light. Clara, running on the fumes of a 14-hour ER shift and the lingering adrenaline of the storm, stood up. She was terrified, her knees knocking together beneath the table, but years of dealing with aggressive, entitled men in the hospital had built a stubborn reflex in her. "Excuse me," Clara said, her voice shaking only slightly. "You can't just walk in here and take him. I don't know who you are, and I have a legal obligation as a medical professional to ensure this child is safe. I need to see some identification." The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, the dozen suited men stood perfectly still in the freezing rain, watching through the glass. Behind the counter, Bill let out a pathetic, strangled whimper. The man stared down at Clara. For a second, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his flawless face, rapidly replaced by a look of dark, dangerous amusement. He tilted his head, studying her, as if she were a fascinating, suicidal insect. "You are demanding my identification," he stated, the words rolling off his tongue like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Yes," Clara insisted, crossing her arms to hide her trembling hands. "He was abandoned in a storm. He said your car was attacked. If you are his father, prove it, or I am screaming for Bill to dial 911. The man took a half step forward. Suddenly, he was entirely in her personal space. Clara hadn't even seen him move. The scent of copper grew overpowering. He looked down into her eyes, and Clara felt a dizzying sensation, as if gravity had abruptly shifted. "My name is Arthur Pendleton," he said slowly, lying with flawless ease. "Though you will find no government database that holds that name, nor any authority in this city brave enough to question it, I am taking my son. You are alive right now, Clara Higgins, purely because you did not harm him." He reached out. Clara tried to flinch away, but he was impossibly fast. His long fingers clamped around her wrist. The contact sent a shock of absolute horror through her nervous system. His skin wasn't just cold, it was freezing, possessing the rigid, unyielding density of solid marble. There was no pulse beneath his flesh, none at all. He released her wrist instantly, as if her warmth disgusted him, and reached into his tailored coat. He withdrew a thick, uncounted stack of $100 bills bound by a black silk ribbon and dropped it onto the diner table. "For the coat," he murmured. Without another word, he turned. The diner door swung open before he even touched the handle, and he and Leo stepped out into the storm. Clara stood frozen, watching as the boy climbed into the center SUV. The man paused before getting in, looking back through the rain directly at Clara. His eyes flashed brilliant crimson in the darkness. Then the door slammed shut. The three massive vehicles reversed in perfect unison and peeled away into the flooded streets, disappearing into the storm as if they had never been there. Clara collapsed back into the red vinyl booth, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She looked down at the stack of cash, then up at Bill. The older man was pale, clutching a crucifix that hung around his neck. "Clara!" Bill whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't ever tell anyone what you saw tonight. Do you hear me? You forget this ever happened." Clara tried to forget. For exactly 7 days, she threw herself into her work at Boston General, pulling extra shifts, drowning herself in the chaotic reality of trauma bays and code blues just to keep her mind occupied. She convinced herself that the icy touch of the man at the diner was just poor circulation. She convinced herself the red flash in his eyes was a reflection of the taillights. She locked the stack of $100 bills, which amounted to exactly $50,000, inside a shoebox under her bed, terrified to spend a single cent of it. But the world around her began to alter in bizarre, invisible ways. It started small. Clara lived in a run-down, rent-controlled apartment in Dorchester with a roommate, Chloe. Their landlord, a sleazy man named Marcus, who had spent the last 6 months threatening to evict them if they didn't accept illegal rent hikes, suddenly disappeared. On Tuesday, a polite corporate lawyer showed up at their door, handing Clara the deed to the entire apartment building. Compliments of a private benefactor, Ms. Higgins, the lawyer had said, refusing to answer any questions before walking away. 2 days later, Clara was called into the hospital's administration office. She sat nervously, expecting to be reprimanded for something. Instead, the hospital administrator, looking visibly sweating and pale, informed her that a private trust had not only paid off her entire $84,000 nursing school debt, but had also made a $10 million donation to the hospital's trauma ward, strictly under the condition that Clara Higgins dictate how the funds were used. Clara left the office feeling not relieved but violently ill. This wasn't charity. This was a demonstration of absolute terrifying power. It was a net closing around her. The final straw occurred on Friday night. For 3 months, Clara had been harassed by a hospital orderly named Greg. He was aggressive, frequently cornering her in supply closets, and human resources had repeatedly ignored her complaints. On Friday morning, the local news reported a gruesome discovery down by the Boston Harbor. A man later identified as Greg had been found dead. The news anchor nervously read the police statement. The victim had been subjected to a savage animal attack. Completely drained of blood, his throat torn to ribbons. Clara dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on her kitchen floor. She ran to her bedroom, locked the door, and flipped open her laptop. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. She searched the name the man had given her, Arthur Pendleton. Nothing. No social media, no business records, no birth certificates. But Clara was smart. She remembered the boy's ring, the heavy gold signet with the snarling wolf and crossed swords. She spent hours diving into dark corners of the internet, scrolling through heraldry databases, antique auction records, and obscure historical forums. Finally, at 3 in the morning, she found a match on a cryptic, heavily encrypted message board dedicated to New England urban legends and organized crime law. The crest belonged to the House of Reed. The forum post, written by an anonymous user who claimed to have fled the state, detailed a shadow society operating in the Northeast. They weren't the mafia. They were older. They controlled real estate, shipping, and politics. They were referred to as the Night Court. And at the top of this hierarchy was a name whispered with absolute dread: Nathaniel Reed. Billionaire, recluse, the king of the night. If he looks at you, you belong to him. If he bleeds you, you are dead. Attached to the bottom of the forum post was a grainy black and white surveillance photo taken outside a charity gala 10 years ago. Clara zoomed in. It was the man from the diner. He hadn't aged a single day. A sharp knock at her bedroom door made Clara scream, slamming her laptop shut. "Clara," Chloe's muffled voice came through the wood. "Hey, are you okay? A courier just dropped something off for you. It looks fancy." Clara swallowed hard-tasting bile in the back of her throat. She unlocked the door. Chloe stood there holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. There was no stamp, no return address. Just Clara's name written in elegant, flowing black calligraphy. It was sealed with heavy black wax stamped with the unmistakable crest of a snarling wolf and crossed swords. Clara took the envelope. It felt unnaturally cold against her skin. She broke the wax seal and pulled out a heavy card. The handwriting inside was immaculate. "Ms. Higgins, a life debt in our world is a matter of sacred binding. You preserved the bloodline of my house when you sheltered Leo. Money and material comforts are insufficient compensation for what you have given me. A debt unpaid is a weakness I cannot abide. You will join me for dinner tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock so that I may properly evaluate the woman who stood between my son and the storm. A car will collect you. Do not keep me waiting. Nathaniel Reed." Clara stared at the letter, her vision swimming. The payment of her debts, the deed to the building, the brutal murder of the man who harassed her. It wasn't a reward. It was a cleansing of her life, clearing the board so that nothing stood between her and him. She had saved a child in the rain, and in doing so she had caught the eye of a monster who did not take no for an answer. And tomorrow at 8 o'clock he was coming to collect. Saturday evening arrived with the agonizing slowness of a pending execution. Clara spent the entire day in a state of hypervigilant panic. She considered running. She looked up flights to California, bus tickets to Canada, anything to put distance between herself and Boston. But every time she glanced out of her apartment window, she saw a sleek, unmarked black sedan parked across the street. The engine was never running, but the tinted windows were always facing her building. She was already a prisoner. The cage just hadn't been locked yet. By 7 p.m., Clara realized that fleeing would only endanger Chloe, her oblivious roommate, who was currently binge-watching reality television in the living room. Clara had to face this. She was a trauma nurse. She dealt with life and death on a daily basis. She could survive a dinner. She dressed with a specific defensive intention. She chose a high-necked, long-sleeved black dress that fell below her knees, pairing it with sensible flat leather boots. It was an outfit devoid of vulnerability, a sartorial armor. She pulled her hair back into a tight, severe bun, refusing to wear a drop of makeup. She was not going on a date. She was answering a summons. At precisely 7:59 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your transport is waiting." Clara grabbed her purse, slipping a heavy titanium surgical scalpel from her hospital locker into the inner pocket. It was a pathetic weapon against a man who could supposedly crush bone like dry leaves, but the cold weight of the metal offered a microscopic shred of comfort. She walked out of her building to find a midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom idling silently at the curb. The sheer size and opulence of the vehicle looked absurdly out of place on the gritty Dorchester street. A man built like a professional linebacker dressed in a sharp chauffeur's suit stood by the rear passenger door. He opened it without a word as Clara approached. "I can drive myself," Clara stated, her voice tight. "Mr. Reed insists on ensuring your safe transit, Ms. Higgins," the driver replied. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses despite the setting sun. "Please, we have a schedule to maintain." Clara climbed into the cavernous back seat. The interior smelled of rich, untreated leather mahogany and a faint, icy trace of the pine and copper scent she associated with Nathaniel Reed. The doors locked with a heavy, definitive thud, sealing her inside a soundproof vault. The drive took them out of Boston, heading straight for the isolated, wealthy enclaves of the North Shore. As the city lights faded into the rearview mirror, Clara watched the landscape shift to dark, winding coastal roads bordered by ancient gnarled trees. They were driving toward Manchester by the Sea, entering a territory of old money and sprawling hidden estates. After an hour, the Rolls-Royce turned onto a private, unlit road. Massive wrought-iron gates, adorned with the snarling wolf crest, swung open automatically. The driveway was miles long, cutting through a dense, manicured forest, before finally opening up to a cliffside clearing. Clara's breath hitched. The Reed estate was a monstrous Gothic revival fortress of dark stone and towering spires perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic Ocean. It looked less like a home and more like a mausoleum for giants. The crashing of the waves below echoed like distant artillery fire. The car glided to a halt in front of a sweeping marble staircase. The driver opened the door and Clara stepped out into the biting ocean wind. Waiting for her at the top of the stairs was an older woman in a severe black dress, her hair pulled tight, her posture rigidly straight. "Ms. Higgins," the woman said, her voice a dry rasp. "I am Mrs. Gable. I oversee the household. Mr. Reed is waiting for you in the formal dining hall. Follow me and please do not stray from the path." Clara followed Mrs. Gable through massive vaulted oak doors into a foyer that could have rivaled a European cathedral. The floors were polished black marble, reflecting the dim, flickering light of massive crystal chandeliers that seemed to use actual candles rather than bulbs. There were no photographs, no modern art, just towering oil paintings of stark landscapes and pale, unsmiling people wearing clothes from centuries past. The silence in the house was oppressive. Clara noticed that the air was unnaturally cold, hovering just above freezing. Her breath plumed slightly in front of her. Mrs. Gable stopped before a set of towering double doors and pushed them open with surprising strength. "The guest has arrived, sir," she announced before stepping back and pulling the doors shut behind Clara, sealing her inside. The dining hall was intimidating in its scale. A massive mahogany table, easily 30 feet long, dominated the center of the room, illuminated by a low-hanging chandelier. A roaring fire crackled in a stone hearth at the far end, fighting a losing battle against the room's pervasive chill. At the head of the table sat Nathaniel Reed. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue suit that mirrored the exact shade of the coat Leo had been wearing the night of the storm. Without the torrential rain masking him, Nathaniel's predatory beauty was almost blinding. His skin had the flawless, luminescent quality of carved alabaster. His dark eyes, currently devoid of the crimson flash Clara remembered locked onto her the moment she entered. "Clara," he murmured. The single word resonated through the vast room, vibrating against her sternum. "You are punctual, a rare and appreciated trait." "I wasn't aware I had a choice, Mr. Reed," Clara replied, refusing to break eye contact, though every survival instinct in her brain was screaming at her to look down to show submission to the apex predator in the room. Nathaniel offered a slow, dangerous smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "There is always a choice, though some choices carry vastly shorter lifespans than others. Please sit." He gestured to the chair immediately to his right. Clara walked the length of the room, her boots clicking loudly on the hardwood floor, and took the seat. The proximity to him was suffocating. The cold radiating from his body was palpable, a chilling aura that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The table was set for one. In front of Clara sat an exquisite multi-course meal, seared scallops, a rich risotto, and a glass of vintage red wine. In front of Nathaniel was absolutely nothing, save for a heavy crystal goblet filled with a dark, viscous burgundy liquid. "Eat," Nathaniel commanded softly. "Your heart rate is elevated, 112 beats per minute. You are running on adrenaline, and your blood sugar is dropping." Clara froze her fork halfway to her plate. "You can hear my heart. I can hear the blood moving through your veins, Clara. I can smell the exact chemical composition of your fear. I can hear the friction of your boots shifting under the table." Nathaniel leaned back, picking up his crystal goblet. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am intimately aware of every biological process occurring within you." "Then you know I'm terrified," Clara said bluntly, deciding that honesty was her only shield. "You bought my apartment building. You paid off my medical school debt. You had a man at my hospital murdered. Why, if this is about saving your son, a simple thank you would have sufficed." Nathaniel's expression darkened. The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "The man who tormented you was a pest. I merely expedited his inevitable demise. And as for my son, you do not comprehend the magnitude of what occurred that night." He set his goblet down with a sharp clack. "Leo is my heir," Nathaniel explained, his voice taking on a lethal edge. My bloodline has ruled the eastern seaboard for nearly 3 centuries. The storm was not a natural weather event. It was a localized atmospheric manipulation orchestrated by the House of Croft. They ambushed our convoy with the intent to eradicate my line. Leo was instructed to hide while my guard dealt with the assassins. Nathaniel leaned closer to her, the scent of crushed pine and copper overwhelming Clara's senses. When you touched him, when you wrapped your coat around him and brought him into the light, you saved him from a secondary sweep of Croft hunters. But in doing so, you marked yourself. Marked myself, Clara whispered, her throat suddenly dry. Vampires, though I despise that vulgar cinematic term, are highly attuned to scent, Nathaniel said. When Victor Croft's hunters tracked Leo's path, they found the bus shelter. They found your scent mixed with his. They know a human intervened, but that is not the primary reason you are sitting at my table tonight. Nathaniel reached out. Clara flinched, but he bypassed her face, his cold fingertips lightly grazing the pulse point at her wrist, resting on the table. The touch sent a jolt of ice straight to her core. Your medical records at Boston General, Nathaniel murmured, his eyes flashing a brief hungry crimson. You are an anomaly, Clara Higgins, blood type Rh null, the golden blood. Fewer than 50 people on this entire planet possess it. In the medical world, you are a universal donor. In my world, your blood is a legendary narcotic. It is power. It is an intoxicating, irresistible delicacy that can permanently bind a lesser vampire to your will, or send them into a feral, homicidal frenzy. Clara yanked her arm back, horror dawning on her. You hacked my medical files. I own the hospital's board of directors. I did not need to hack anything, Nathaniel stated plainly. Victor Croft has discovered your identity. He knows you possess Rh null blood, and he knows you aided my house. As we speak, there is a bounty on your life so vast, it would destabilize small nations. They do not just want to kill you, Clara. They want to harvest you. They want to drain you, drop by drop, to empower their own ranks against me. Clara stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized her. No, this is insane. I'm a nurse. I live in Dorchester. I don't belong in this mafia war. I'm going to the police. I'm going to the FBI. The director of the FBI's regional field office works for me, Nathaniel said, his voice calm, an anchor holding her in the storm. You cannot outrun this, Clara. The moment you step outside my protection, you are dead. Or worse, you are a blood slave to the House of Croft. So what? Clara shouted, tears of pure frustration and terror pricking her eyes. You brought me here to lock me in a cage, to keep me as your personal walking blood bank. In a blur of motion so fast Clara's eyes couldn't track it, Nathaniel was standing directly in front of her. He loomed over her, a dark monolith of ancient power. He reached up, his large hands cupping her face. The cold was shocking, but his grip was surprisingly gentle, a terrifying contrast to his immense strength. I brought you here because you saved my son, Nathaniel whispered fiercely, his face inches from hers, his eyes glowing a deep, mesmerizing ruby. You are under the absolute protection of the House of Reed. You are not my prisoner, Clara, but you are my possession, and I do not let anyone touch what is mine. Before Clara could process the terrifying possessiveness of his words, the massive crystal chandelier above the dining table violently flickered, then died. The room plunged into darkness save for the weak dancing orange light of the fireplace. Nathaniel's head snapped toward the towering bay windows overlooking the cliffside. The atmosphere in the room instantly transformed. The aristocratic, composed billionaire vanished. In his place stood a predator primed for slaughter, his jaw clenched, and a low, guttural snarl, a sound that was entirely inhuman, vibrated from deep within his chest. They are here, he hissed. Who? Clara gasped, taking a step back. Croft's assassins. They breached the outer wards. Nathaniel grabbed Clara's arm, his grip no longer gentle. It was like being clamped in an iron vise. Move, now! He dragged her toward a hidden panel in the mahogany wall behind the head of the table. He pressed a specific sequence on the wood, and a heavy steel door slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a dimly lit panic room. Crash! The sound of shattering glass was deafening. Clara screamed as the massive, reinforced bay windows of the dining room exploded inward. A storm of glass shards, the size of daggers, rained down over the dining table, shredding the antique wood and destroying the feast. Through the ruined windows, 3 figures leapt into the room. They didn't climb. They vaulted 20 feet from the terrace floor into the hall with terrifying insect-like agility. They were dressed in tactical black gear, their faces concealed by tactical masks, wielding heavily modified submachine guns and wicked curved blades that glinted silver in the firelight. Get inside the vault, and do not come out!" Nathaniel roared over the wind, howling through the broken windows. He shoved Clara roughly into the panic room. But as the steel door began to slide shut, Clara couldn't look away. She was paralyzed by the gruesome spectacle unfolding in the dining hall. The three assassins moved with a speed that defied physics surrounding Nathaniel. The first assassin lunged, swinging a silver blade aimed directly at Nathaniel's neck. Nathaniel didn't dodge. He stepped into the strike. With a sickening crack, Nathaniel caught the assassin's forearm, snapping the bone entirely in half. The assassin didn't even have time to scream before Nathaniel drove his other hand straight through the man's tactical armor, plunging his fist directly into the assassin's chest. A horrific wet, tearing sound echoed over the wind as Nathaniel ripped his hand back, clutching a dark, pulsating mass. He crushed the heart in his grip, tossing the lifeless body aside like a broken toy. The second assassin opened fire. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire filled the room. Clara watched in absolute shock as the bullets struck Nathaniel's back, tearing through his expensive suit. He staggered slightly, but no blood spilled from the wounds. Nathaniel spun around, his eyes now blazing like miniature suns of pure crimson. He roared a sound that shook the very foundations of the estate and closed the distance to the shooter in a literal blink of an eye. He grabbed the assassin by the throat, lifting him 3 feet off the ground, and with a casual, brutal twist of his wrist, snapped the man's neck. The crack was louder than a gunshot. The third assassin, realizing the fight was lost, turned to flee back through the shattered window. "You do not leave my house alive!" Nathaniel bellowed. He moved faster than the eye could follow, intercepting the fleeing vampire at the window's edge. Nathaniel seized the man by the collar and the belt, lifting him over his head, and hurled him with earth-shattering force against the solid stone mantelpiece of the fireplace. The impact shattered the marble and the assassin's spine simultaneously. The fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Clara stood trembling in the doorway of the panic room, the heavy steel door jammed on a piece of debris, preventing it from fully closing. Her breath came in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. Her medical training was entirely useless here. She had just watched a man withstand automatic gunfire and dismantle 3 heavily armed killers with his bare hands. The dining hall was a war zone. Glass splintered wood and blood covered the floor. The wind off the ocean whipped violently through the room, blowing out the fire in the hearth. Nathaniel stood amidst the wreckage. His bespoke suit was ruined, riddled with bullet holes and soaked in the blood of his enemies. He breathed heavily, his chest heaving, his hands dripping with dark crimson. Slowly, the glowing red of his irises faded back to the deep, endless black. He turned toward the panic room, locking eyes with Clara. For a terrifying moment, Clara saw the monster. She saw the apex predator, riding the high of absolute violence, completely unchained from humanity. But as he looked at her shivering, terrified form, his posture softened. He walked slowly toward her, his boots crunching over the broken glass. He stopped just outside the vault door, looking down at his blood-soaked hands, then back at her. "This is the reality of my world, Clara," Nathaniel said, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. "This is what I am. This is what hunts you." Clara backed up against the cold steel wall of the panic room, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. "They came for me," she sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving her empty and terrified. "Because of my blood, because of Leo." Nathaniel stepped into the small room. He didn't touch her. He simply knelt before her, bringing himself down to her eye level. Despite the carnage he had just inflicted, his eyes held a strange, ancient sorrow. "They came to take what is mine," Nathaniel corrected softly. "But they failed, and they will continue to fail." He reached out his bloody hand, hovering inches from her cheek, desperate to touch her, but stopping himself. "Your old life is gone, Clara Higgins. The apartment in Dorchester, the shifts at the hospital, the illusion of safety. It died the moment you wrapped your coat around my son. You are standing in the center of a war that has raged for centuries." "I don't want this," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I just want to go home." "This is your home now," Nathaniel said, the finality in his tone echoing like a heavy vault door slamming shut. "You will remain at this estate. You will be guarded by my finest men. You will never want for anything, you will never be harmed, and you will never be taken from me. Do you understand? Clara looked into the dark abyss of his eyes. She realized with chilling clarity that he wasn't asking for her permission. He was stating a fact. She was the golden blood. She was the savior of his son. She was the ultimate prize in a lethal underworld, and the Vampire King had just claimed her. Clara slowly closed her eyes, a single tear escaping down her cheek, and nodded. The cage was completely irreversibly locked. For a month, Clara's world was reduced to the sprawling, impenetrable borders of the Reed estate. Her captivity was agonizingly beautiful, a gilded cage forged from ancient money and lethal power. She was given the master guest suite in the West Wing, a massive room featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an uninterrupted, dizzying view of the churning Atlantic Ocean. Her closet had been stocked overnight with an array of designer clothing that cost more than her entire nursing school tuition. There were cashmere sweaters from Loro Piana, tailored silk blouses by Oscar de la Renta, and rows of pristine, untouched Christian Louboutin shoes. On her vanity sat a small fortune in La Mer skincare products, replaced before she could even empty the jars. Every morning, Mrs. Gable brought her a copy of the Boston Globe and a breakfast of perfectly poached eggs and imported truffles. Clara read the paper religiously, searching for any sign of her old life. She found none. Her roommate Chloe had supposedly moved to a high-end apartment in Manhattan on a random, anonymous scholarship. Clara's resignation from Boston General had been filed flawlessly. It was as if Clara Higgins had simply ceased to exist in the mortal world, absorbed entirely into the shadows of the night court. Despite the extreme luxury, Clara was suffocating. She was an emergency room nurse. She thrived on chaos, on saving lives, on the brutal, exhausting reality of human fragility. Here she was, nothing but a fragile porcelain doll guarded by men in tactical gear who shadowed her every time she stepped out into the estate's manicured gardens. Her only solace was Leo. The ancient formal child visited her suite every afternoon. He would sit on the edge of her plush velvet sofa, swinging his legs like a normal 6-year-old, though his conversations were anything but normal. "You are unhappy, Clara," Leo noted one rainy Tuesday, his pale blue eyes studying her as she stared blankly out at the ocean. "Your heart rate is perpetually depressed. Mrs. Gable reports that you barely touch the Kobe beef prepared for your dinner." Clara sighed, turning away from the window. She sat beside him, pulling a heavy cashmere throw over her legs. "I miss my job, Leo. I spent years training to help people. Now I just sit here and wait. I feel useless." Leo tilted his head, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. "You are not useless. You are the highest valued asset within the House of Reed. Father has deployed 75 of our most elite enforcers strictly to monitor the perimeter for your safety. He executed 3 regional barons last week simply because they questioned his decision to harbor you." Clara shuddered. The casual way Leo discussed mass murder was a constant, terrifying reminder of the world she now inhabited. "That doesn't make me feel better, Leo. It makes me feel like a walking target." "You are safe here," a deep, resonant voice echoed from the doorway. Clara jumped. Nathaniel leaned against the heavy oak frame of her open door. He wore a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, exposing forearms corded with muscle and pale, flawless skin. The sheer physical presence of the man still made the breath catch in Clara's throat. He exuded an intoxicating mix of absolute authority and a dark, predatory magnetism that Clara fought daily to resist. Leo immediately slipped off the sofa, offering a stiff, formal bow. "Father, go to your tutors, Leo. I wish to speak with Clara alone," Nathaniel commanded softly. Leo nodded and glided out of the room, leaving a heavy, suffocating tension in his wake. Nathaniel stepped inside the door, clicking shut behind him. He closed the distance between them with that impossible fluid grace, stopping just inches from where Clara sat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim velvet box. He popped it open, revealing a breathtaking Cartier Tank Française watch glittering with a perimeter of flawless diamonds. "I noticed you continually look at the blank wall where a clock used to be in your apartment," Nathaniel murmured, holding the box out to her. Clara looked at the watch, then up at his impossibly handsome face. She didn't reach for it. "I don't want a watch, Nathaniel. I want a purpose. If you're going to keep me locked up in this fortress, give me something to do. Let me set up a medical bay. Your guards get injured. Your people get hurt. Let me be a nurse." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. A flash of crimson bled into his dark irises. "My guards heal in a matter of hours. They do not require mortal medicine, and I will not have you exposing yourself to the blood of my soldiers. Because you're afraid they'll smell me," Clara challenged, standing up to meet his gaze. She was much shorter, but her defiance burned bright. "Because my golden blood is too tempting. Nathaniel's hand shot out not in violence, but in desperation. He gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his solid, freezing chest. Clara gasped, her hands flying up to rest against his shirt. She could feel no heartbeat, only the terrifying stillness of immortality. "Because I am tempted, Clara," Nathaniel whispered, his voice a ragged, agonizing groan. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. The sensation of his cold nose brushing against her pulse point sent a violent shiver down her spine. "Every second of every day I smell the sweetness in your veins. It takes every ounce of my ancient restraint not to bite you, to claim you entirely, to bind you to my soul. If another vampire even looks at your throat, I will rip their head from their shoulders." He pulled back slowly, his eyes blazing with a feral, terrifying hunger mixed with deep, desperate affection. "You are my absolute weakness, and tomorrow night I must expose you to the very monsters who want to drain you dry." The revelation struck Clara like a physical blow. "Expose me? What are you talking about?" Nathaniel released her, turning his back to gaze out the window, his posture rigid. "The Night Court demands a summit. Victor Croft has petitioned the High Council. He claims I am harboring a human anomaly and hoarding her blood for military supremacy. If I refuse to present you at the autumn gala tomorrow evening, it will be viewed as an act of war. The entire eastern seaboard will burn, and my house will be besieged by a combined force we cannot withstand." "You want to parade me in front of them?" Clara's voice trembled. "I want to hide you in the deepest vault in this estate." Nathaniel countered, his voice dripping with venom. "But politics dictates. I must show them you are under my protection. You will stand by my side. You will not speak unless spoken to, and you will not leave my physical perimeter for a single second. Do you understand?" The following evening, the estate was transformed. The sweeping driveways were lined with dozens of Maybachs, Bentleys, and armored Rolls-Royces. The air crackled with a dark, oppressive energy as the most lethal predators in North America descended upon the Reed fortress. Clara was dressed by Mrs. Gable in a stunning floor-length gown of deep crimson silk, a deliberate, dangerous color choice by Nathaniel. It clung to her curves, offering no armor, only elegance. Around her neck, she wore a heavy, antique platinum choker, adorned with a massive, square-cut ruby. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but Clara knew what it really was, a physical barrier protecting her jugular. When she descended the grand staircase on Nathaniel's arm, the massive ballroom fell dead silent. Over 200 guests turned to stare, their eyes varying shades of amber gold and pitch black locked onto Clara. She felt like a bleeding lamb dropped into a pit of starving wolves. The collective inhale of the room as they caught her scent was a sound that would haunt Clara's nightmares forever. It was a wet, unified hiss of raw, unadulterated hunger. Nathaniel's grip on her waist was like a steel trap. He projected an aura of such terrifying, lethal dominance that the nearest vampires physically took a step back. "Smile, my golden queen," Nathaniel murmured in her ear, his lips brushing her skin. "Let them see that you fear nothing while I hold you." The gala was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Nathaniel navigated the room with Clara pressed firmly to his side, trading veiled threats and political pleasantries with ancient, beautiful monsters. Midway through the evening, the crowd parted for a man who looked to be in his late 50s. He was gaunt, his skin possessing a sickly ashen quality. Unlike the luminescent paleness of the others, he leaned heavily on a silver-tipped cane. "Nathaniel," the man wheezed, his pale eyes instantly fixating on Clara's throat. "You have kept the prize to yourself." "Victor," Nathaniel replied, his voice a low, warning growl. "I suggest you avert your gaze before I remove your eyes from your skull." Victor Croft chuckled, but the sound dissolved into a wet, agonizing cough. He pressed a silk handkerchief to his lips. When he pulled it away, Clara's medical training immediately caught the dark, blackish stain on the fabric. "He's dying," Clara realized with a shock. "Vampires aren't supposed to get sick. The marrow rot claims us all eventually." "Reed," Victor gasped, wiping his mouth. "But her arch-null blood, it is the ultimate purge. A single pint could cure me. A single pint could secure a century of peace between our houses. Name your price. Billions territory, anything. She is not for sale, Croft. She is under my protection, Nathaniel stated coldly. Die with dignity, Victor. Do not make me slaughter your house to ensure it. Nathaniel turned away, pulling Clara with him, but the encounter left Clara deeply unsettled. Victor wasn't just a power-hungry rival, he was a desperate dying animal, and desperate animals were the most dangerous. An hour later, the tension in the room boiled over. Nathaniel was momentarily cornered by 3 High Council elders demanding a private audience in the adjacent study. I will be 30 feet away behind those doors, Nathaniel told Clara, his eyes flashing with anxiety. Alistair will not leave your side. Do not move from this pillar. He gestured to Alistair, his massive, heavily scarred captain of the guard, who nodded solemnly. Nathaniel stepped into the study, the heavy oak doors closing behind him. Clara stood by the marble pillar, her heart hammering. The music swelled, a haunting waltz played by a string quartet. Ms. Higgins, Alistair said softly, please step back toward the alcove. You are too exposed here. Clara complied, stepping into the dimly lit, velvet-draped alcove adjacent to the pillar. But as soon as the heavy curtains fell back into place, obscuring them from the main ballroom, Alistair's demeanor changed. He didn't stand guard. He turned to her, his amber eyes wide and apologetic. I am sorry, Clara, Alistair whispered. But my mate, she contracted the rot. Croft promised me the cure if I deliver you. Before Clara could scream, Alistair moved with blinding speed. He clamped a heavy, chloroformed rag over her nose and mouth, simultaneously driving a syringe full of heavy sedatives into her shoulder. Clara thrashed her medical instincts, fighting through the sudden crushing wave of chemical darkness. She reached into the slit of her crimson dress, her fingers closing around the cold titanium of the surgical scalpel she had strapped to her thigh just hours before. With her last ounce of fading strength, Clara drove the scalpel blindly upward, plunging it deep into Alistair's collarbone. The giant vampire roared in pain, dropping the rag. Clara stumbled backward, bursting through the velvet curtains and collapsing onto the edge of the ballroom floor. Nathaniel! She screamed, her voice weak, her vision blurring rapidly as the sedatives flooded her bloodstream. Chaos erupted. Alistair, pulling the scalpel from his flesh, lunged for her, completely disregarding the hundreds of witnesses. The heavy oak doors of the study literally exploded off their hinges. Nathaniel did not walk into the room. He erupted into it like a force of biblical destruction. He crossed the ballroom before the splintered wood of the doors even hit the marble floor. He tackled Alistair with such cataclysmic force that both men crashed through a massive load-bearing stone pillar, sending chunks of debris raining down on the screaming, scattering guests. Traitor! Nathaniel roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers. His eyes were no longer crimson. They were completely demonically black. He seized Alistair by the throat, lifting him into the air. But Alistair, anticipating his own death, had come prepared. He drew a wicked, serrated dagger from his boot. The blade did not gleam like steel. It was a dull, chalky white, carved entirely from compressed white ash and soaked in concentrated UV synthetic venom. As Nathaniel went to snap his neck, Alistair drove the ash dagger directly up, burying it to the hilt just below Nathaniel's ribs. Nathaniel let out a sound that shattered the ballroom windows. It was a roar of absolute agony. He dropped Alistair, stumbling backward, clutching his side. Dark, thick blood began to pour from the wound, but it was accompanied by a horrifying, sizzling sound. Veins of black necrosis rapidly spiderwebbed across Nathaniel's flawless, pale skin, spreading from the wound toward his heart. The ballroom erupted into sheer pandemonium. Seeing the Vampire King wounded, Victor Croft's loyalists drew their weapons. The Reed enforcers retaliated. The elegant gala instantly devolved into a brutal, bloody war zone. Clara, fighting the heavy fog of the sedatives, crawled across the glass-strewn marble floor toward Nathaniel. He had collapsed against the base of the grand staircase, gasping for air. His fangs fully descended his body, convulsing as the UV venom attacked his ancient cellular structure. Nathaniel, Clara sobbed, reaching him and pressing her hands against the wound. Her palms sizzled, burning against the toxic magic radiating from the dagger. Get away, Clara! Nathaniel choked out, his eyes wide with pain and terror for her safety. The venom, it is reaching my heart. I cannot protect you. Run! Shut up, Clara cried, her medical training overriding her fear. She examined the wound. The white ash was dissolving in his bloodstream, acting as a rapidly spreading necrotic poison. Traditional medicine couldn't stop this. The rot claims us all, but our RH null blood, it is the ultimate purge. Victor's words echoed in her mind. If her golden blood could purge an ancient vampire disease, it could purge the venom. You told me my blood is a universal cure, Clara said, her voice dropping to a fierce, steady whisper. She grabbed his broad shoulders, forcing him to look at her. You told me it binds us. No. Nathaniel gasped, realizing what she was about to do. He tried to push her away, but his strength was rapidly failing. I will not make you a slave. I will not take it by force. You're not taking it, Clara said fiercely, tears streaming down her face as she looked into the eyes of the monster who had sacrificed his own empire to keep her safe. I am giving it to you. Clara reached up, pulling the heavy platinum and ruby choker from her neck. She tossed it aside. She shifted closer, straddling his lap amid the chaos of the battling vampires around them, and tilted her head back, exposing the pale, beating pulse of her carotid artery. Drink, she commanded. Nathaniel let out a guttural, desperate sob. The primal hunger inside him, fueled by the agonizing threat of death, shattered his restraints. His eyes flared a brilliant, blinding red. He lunged forward, burying his face in the crook of her neck. Clara gasped, arching her back as his fangs pierced her flesh. It wasn't painful. Instead, an overwhelming, dizzying rush of pure euphoria flooded her nervous system. It was an ancient narcotic magic designed to make prey compliant, but amplified 1,000 times. She felt the heavy, rhythmic draw of his bite, feeling her golden blood flowing from her body into his. The effect on Nathaniel was instantaneous and explosive. The black necrotic veins spreading across his chest halted, then violently reversed. The UV venom was incinerated by the sheer miraculous potency of her RH null blood. The wound closed in a matter of seconds, pushing the remnants of the white ash dagger out of his flesh. When Nathaniel finally pulled away, he was utterly transformed. The ambient power rolling off him was no longer just heavy, it was suffocating. He licked the remnants of her golden blood from his lips, his eyes burning with an unholy, majestic fire. He stood up, lifting Clara effortlessly into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. The fighting in the ballroom abruptly stopped. Every single vampire, whether Croft loyalist or Reed enforcer, felt the tectonic shift in power. The king was not just healed, he was supercharged, vibrating with the legendary, mythical energy of the golden blood. Nathaniel looked across the ruined ballroom, his gaze locking onto Victor Croft, who was staring in absolute trembling horror. Alistair is dead. Nathaniel's voice boomed, carrying no echo but ringing inside the skulls of everyone present. He didn't even look at his former captain, who lay motionless on the floor, the venom from Clara's scalpel strike having done its work. Nathaniel took a step forward, his arm wrapped protectively around Clara's waist. Victor Croft, you brought a weapon of the ancients into my home. You attempted to steal my queen. Your bloodline ends tonight. With a flick of his wrist, a casual gesture backed by the new terrifying power coursing through his veins, an invisible kinetic force slammed into Victor Croft. The older vampire was thrown backward, crashing into the massive fireplace. He did not get up. The remaining Croft loyalists instantly dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in total unconditional surrender. The Night Court was broken and instantly reforged under a single, unchallenged ruler. Nathaniel looked down at Clara. She was pale, leaning heavily against his chest, but the puncture wounds on her neck had already stopped bleeding, sealed by his saliva. She wasn't terrified anymore. She felt an unbreakable, invisible tether pulsing between them, a profound, ancient bond forged in blood and sacrifice. You saved me, Nathaniel whispered, his voice trembling with raw, unfiltered awe. He pressed his forehead against hers, oblivious to the kneeling audience of monsters surrounding them. You saved my son in the storm, and you saved my soul in the fire. You belong to me now, Clara murmured, a tired but victorious smile touching her lips. I paid your debt, Nathaniel Reed. Now you work for me. Nathaniel let out a dark, rich laugh, pressing a deep, possessive kiss to her lips. Forever, my queen, to the end of time itself. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the silence of his chest, knowing she would never return to the small apartment in Dorchester. The storm had brought her to the darkness, but she had become the light that ruled it. Wow! Clara went from a terrified nurse to the unquestioned queen of the Night Court. Her golden blood truly changed the fate of the entire vampire underworld. What did you think of that epic showdown? If you love this dark, thrilling romance and want more intense vampire stories, please smash that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Let us know in the comments. Would you have offered your blood to save Nathaniel? See you in the next story.